morning, everybody. I think we can start getting whoever's outside to come inside. I know some of our panel members are already, those joining virtually, are already online, so that we then start shortly with the session. Thank you. But welcome, everybody, and good morning. And also to the participants online, we welcome all participants. But I think when you facilitate, you can stand here, and then look at them from here. Yeah. It's the teaching. Okay, good morning, everybody. Warm welcome on this morning to everybody. It's a great pleasure that everybody's gathered here today for this very important event. As you know, today we are gathered here to honor the legacy and life of Professor David Kaplan, who contributed immensely, not only to South Africa, but the globe and Africa at large. And the seminar, like us, before we start, to please a lot of participants who are also attending or have connected virtually, and we will expect more audience to join us this morning. My name is Annalene Morgan. I'll be the program director for this seminar. I'm the acting CEO of the National Advisory Council on Innovation. So I will direct this program for today. I'd like to welcome, firstly, our Director General, Dr. Mulungisicele, who's here, and who will be doing the official opening of this seminar. But also somebody that has worked extensively with Professor Kaplan, and the DG will share within his opening remarks. I'd also like to welcome the family, his wife, Ms. Kaplan, who's online. Welcome, and also the family that's with you online. We appreciate that we will be sharing this very important session with you. So we welcome to the Kaplan family who's joining us online. I'd also like to welcome the former Minister for Trade and Industry, Dr. Rob Davies, who will be sharing the tribute this morning. Welcome, former Minister, who's also joining us online. I'd like to welcome distinguished guests, colleagues and friends of Prof that are gathered here today to share this momentous day. So with those welcoming remarks, let me take this opportunity then to welcome our DG, Dr. Mulungisicele, the Director General of the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, to officially open the seminar. Over to you, DG.
Program Director, thank you very much, Ms. Annelyn Morgan, the acting CEO of NECI. Let me extend first and foremost our sincerest apologies on behalf of Minister Nzimande, who would have liked to join the seminar, but due to government commitments, he sends his grateful and honor and honor. Vice Chancellor of UCT in his absentia, Professor Moshabela, the heads of and CEOs of our public entities, the DDGs of the department, esteemed colleagues, partners, both local and internationally, and also representatives of government, the industry and academia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As the program director indicated, I knew Dave Kaplan for a very long time, but well, firstly as a student and also as a government official, but later on I worked closely with him when we were at NECI, and he was contributing intellectually to our work. To Professor Kaplan's family, friends, colleagues from various sectors, we are all gathered here in person and online. It's really heartfelt welcome which we would like to extend. It is both a profound privilege and a solemn responsibility to open this seminar, dedicated to honoring the monumental life and the legacy of Professor Dave Kaplan. He was far more than an esteemed economist or a brilliant academic or a seasoned government senior official as he worked at the then DTI. In our view, he remains one of the foremost thinkers and the guiding forces behind our national system of innovation and its role and contribution to the economy. Since 1994, or perhaps even before that, but let me confine it to post-1994 era, Dave Kaplan, through his powerful intellect, deep sense of integrity and strong commitment, he helped to design, while at the same part of our history, they continue to actively how our national will work tomorrow. His contributions were instrumental in creating the key policies and strategic tools which we are still using and relying upon. And without any doubt, we will still be drawing insights from his work into the future. Just to cite a few examples through which Dave Kaplan made direct influence in several areas of our work. Firstly, he was instrumental in the creation of our foundational 1996 white paper on science and technology, which laid the necessary basis for the construction of the post-apartheid framework for using science, technology, and innovation to decisively respond to societal challenges, and thus laying the necessary basis to establish an inclusive and sustainable socio-economic development. And he continued to shape our policy conversation and contributed to its reflective dimension, which happened through various processes, including the 2016 review of the very same paper to which he had earlier contributed. His rigorous analysis and foresight were vital to the 2024 ministerial review of science, technology, and innovation landscape, where his insights helped shape the assessment and policy options that were presented to the then Minister of Science, Technology, and Innovation, Dr. Naledi Pandor. For years, in the country to leverage administrative data National Treasury Database. Experiment in the quest to answer the critical innovation. In this particular case, the factors behind the declining business expenditure on R&D, which remains a grave concern to our system as we struggle to progress towards the realization of the NDP target of 1.5% growth expenditure on R&D as a percentage of gross domestic product. I'm glad and grateful that colleagues like Lawrence Edwards, who worked with Dave Kaplan in this study, are part of this conversation, and I hope that this work will continue, as we still need to understand why business continue not to invest as much as they ought to in R&D. It is worth noting that one of the most persistent challenges we still face is the disconnect between innovation policy and the broader economic and industrial policy. Of course, this is notwithstanding some modest progress made recently through various iterative master plans that we have seen some progress, including the new emerging industrial policy, which has dedicated section focusing on the innovation. But there's still a gap, and that gap needs to be properly analyzed, understood, and solutions must be found about what would be the optimal and the best way to integrate innovation and industrial policy for the betterment of our society and to and economic challenges, and achieving long-term. In the end, fragmentation hinders the development of an integrated policy framework capable of converting innovation into tangible and lasting, inclusive and sustainable economic growth and lasting structural change. What we can say about Professor Kaplan's unique strengths is that it was his ability to bridge this divide. He's an embodiment of why we need this integration between innovation and industrial policies. As an economist with a deep practical understanding of STI systems, he never saw innovation as a separate sector. Instead, he understood it as the core engine of an inclusive economic development fueled by the national capability. He masterfully translated the concepts of innovation, capabilities, learning, and technological change into the fundamental language of economics: investment, productivity, employment, exports, diversity, and competitiveness. This synthesis was the power behind his work. And there's nowhere where one can easily identify and observe this then if one reads the recent iterations of the STI indicators report, especially the sections that he worked on them, focusing on the economy and on the relationship between innovation and the economy. Dave Kaplan firmly argued that policy must focus on building both the human and institutional capabilities within firms, research organizations, and the state itself, the very foundations that would allow innovation capabilities to be absorbed, adapted, and assimilated locally. To honor his legacy, we must confront the real questions that have allowed us with Professor Kaplan. We understand that sometimes he had to travel to South Africa and leave you, Jennifer, in Paris. Hopefully, he was able to make up, and he would tell us, or at least share with me, some of his joyful moments that he will spend with you and your grandchildren. We also wish to appreciate his dedication that he has made to this dedication that he has made to this country from an early age, which I hope Minister Rob Davis will speak to, and how he contributed towards the aspirations of a nation building and a better life for all South Africans. His contributions will continue to shape our policy development and discourse as we work towards building a better life for all, by addressing the triple challenges of unemployment, inequality, and poverty, but also understanding the geopolitics of science, technology, and innovation, which has seen science, technology, and innovation being seen as a national security matter rather than a public good. And so we understand the consequences. We need to appreciate, we need to analyze the impact and implications of the weaponization and the securitization of STI in respect of both how our emerging and developing economies will need to structure and develop the necessary instruments, utilizing science, the power of science, technology, and innovation to respond to the emerging and the pressing societal challenges, while it is you all
immensely us and within his work. And I think this will be further amplified by the forthcoming speakers that will be taking the floor. I think it is only befitting for me to re-invite you back, DG, to the podium to come and introduce our former Honourable Minister for Trade and Industry of South Africa, Dr. Rob Davis.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome our former Minister of Trade and Industry, Dr. Rob Davis, and as I understand, he's also an honorary professor and an associate professor, both at the University of Cape Town's Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance, and is also a member of the Advisory Council on Trade and Industrial Development, appointed by the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Between 2009 and 2019, he served as South Africa's Minister of Trade and Industry and was a Member of Parliament for the ANC between 1994 and 2019. He holds an honorary degree in economics from Rhodes University, a master's degree in international relations from the University of Southampton, and a DPhil from the University of Sussex. Before becoming a member of the South Africa's first democratic parliament, he held various academic positions, including the professor and the co-director of the Center for Southern African Studies at the University of the Western Cape, and Professor Auxiliary at the Center of African Studies at Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique. So let us welcome Rob Davis with around, let us welcome him, both online and in person. Over to you, Minister. We're looking forward to your talk.
Well, thank you very much, DG, Program Director. Let me begin what influenced Dave in that I'm sure he would have. And I want to thank both of you for inviting me to make some reflections. I knew Dave probably longer than many of you were alive. I knew him from the late 1960s, and I got to know him particularly when we were students together at the University of Sussex. And in fact, I am probably unique among those of you here. I knew him better then than I knew him in his later years of life, which I'm sure most of you are more familiar with than I am. But when I was asked to make this intervention, I went back into my papers and I found a nearly 50-year-old set of notes, not notes, typed photostat pages from the thesis which he was awarded at the University of Sussex in 1977. And when I looked through that again, I don't have the entire thing with me, but I have several of the chapters, yellow in pages, from that DPhil. And when I looked through it, I thought to myself that it actually is a remarkable piece of work, which I think even now deserves to be much more widely known and appreciated than I think it actually is. So Dave's thesis was on the role of the state in South Africa and the particular form of state that emerged in South Africa and its implications for the development of the productive forces in South Africa, and not least for the industrial development that occurred during the period of segregation and apartheid. Now, I think that while we can all appreciate that there were significant weaknesses and problems with the industrial development as it occurred, it was inward orientated to serving the needs and interests of a class in particular, were paid wages at a level that allowed for significant accumulation to take place across the economy and intervened often brutally and certainly in a racist and a very directly exploitative way. At the same time, that state also intervened to support the development of the productive forces in the industrial sector, which would not otherwise have occurred. And so, for example, he analyzed the battle that took place, and it was a battle within the state over the Customs Tariff Act, the Customs Tariff Act of 1925, which was one of the interventions which was made to support the emergence of industries after there'd been some nascent industrial development during the First World War, but that had given ground after the reestablishment of trade routes in the end of the First World War. And that the continuation of the development of manufacturing industry depended on those interventions. This was frontally opposed by mining capital, which was linked up with British finance capital at the time. In addition to that, in the 20s, there was the establishment of the Iron and Steel Company, ISCOR, as a state enterprise. And Day then goes on to analyze later on in the 1940s and in the early apartheid period. And there what happened was that again, with the disruption of trade links and trade routes during the Second World War, there'd been the emergence of a number of additional industries that had grown up. And Dave analyzes and shows that a number of those were small scale, were quite vulnerable to the restoration of trade routes and international trade, and that one of the things that they could not do was to continue to accumulate. The IDC, or the CEO of the IDC, was talking about that in the South African circumstances, that they could no longer support what he called the luxury of competition when one large unit could supply the whole of the market. And so they backed away from the policies of supporting small enterprises, accepted the monopolization that was beginning to take place, supported the insertion of foreign capital that was coming into the country at the time, and that this led to the particular character which we had of conglomerates, but with industrial capacity embedded in that, and with a significant state-owned sector that was part of this, which included at that stage not just ISCOR, but also Sasol. And I think that it's important that we realize that these efforts, although, as I said earlier, constrained by the racial and colonial character of South Africa, or semi-colonial character of South Africa at the time, um, were, were significant shifts in the productive structure of the country. And I recall an intervention that Ha-Joon Chang gave when he was speaking at one of the Appord seminars held here in South Africa some years ago. And he did a calculation and he said that at the end of the apartheid period, South Africa was literally the most industrialized nation outside of the core capitalist world. He said we produced 138 US dollars per head of manufacturing value added, which was 61% that of Japan and 15% that of the United States. And they then pointed out, of course, is that we had regressed to becoming not a significant manufacturing country. Now, I'm making those points because, and of course, that is, I think, an observation which has now been generalized as a proposition by, among others, the work of Ha-Joon Chang. There is one interesting little footnote that I thought was amusing to me, was that during the time that Dave was analyzing the role of the apartheid state in industrial development, South Africa, of course, was a founder member of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And apart from the continuing reality that during this time, the apartheid state arrogantly declared South Africa to be a developed country, and therefore to take on all the obligations in international trade arrangements of developed countries, something which has been very, very hard to break out of in subsequent WTO engagements. Apart from that, and apart from later on, South Africa just keeping its head below the parapet so that nobody said it's time to throw them out when sanctions came in, the one intervention that the South Africa did make over the time was to try to resist Japan getting most favored nation status in the GATT. And I think this points to something quite important, that already existing industrializers are very wary of the new industrializers, the things that they are doing. I'm, of course, old enough to remember the days when Japan was seen in much the same way in the developed world as China is today, as a cheat and an upstart that doesn't deserve to be recognized as one of the club. It might seem a bit strange now, and of course in South Africa that all changed when the Wessels family entered into an agreement with Toyota, and as we would say, the rest is history. So I think that out of that kind of understanding, I think, of the importance and significance of industrialization, Dave then turned, as the democratic transition was leading the work that became called the integration. And I think a theme that emerges across all of those pieces that I've just cited is that of competitiveness. I think that what had been seen is that the world was changing. The world was changing in the direction of the globalization and neoliberalism, the policies of the Washington Consensus, the impact of the Uruguay round tariff reductions, where South Africa was particularly sharply affected for the reason I already mentioned, of being classified under the GATT as a developed country. And all of that, I think, led to an emphasis on competitiveness. Now, I think that this emphasis on competitiveness was correct in a fundamental way, that the exposure of the manufacturing sector to greater international competition was something which was inescapable. But I do think that, and I don't think Dave was part of this, I do think that there was a tendency at the time to regard the existing industrial capacity in South Africa as a bunch of rent seekers who were dependent on government handouts. In any case, they were white, and it didn't really matter if we let them go. I think that and that if we let them go, they were going to be replaced by foreign investors who were going to come in and raise the capacity of our uh, um, industrial sector, and we would all be better off, and we would be able to proceed and advance industrial development that way. I think we have US and UK financial institutions are ruling the roost and making much of their money not from any investments in any productive sector in South Africa, and certainly not in the industrial base. That is, I think, is the stark reality which stares us in the face. And I want to just make a very quick reference. I happen to have the advantage to have seen this book because I was asked to make some comment on it for promotion purposes. Akemi Okbe, who is was a senior minister in Ethiopia, responsible for many of the innovations and interventions that have been made in Ethiopia, which have led to some industrial development. Also, incidentally, responsible for the restructuring of Ethiopian Airlines into a globally competitive international airline. But he was now a professor at the School of Oriental African Studies in the UK. He has written a book which is coming out shortly called Productive Transformation in Africa Industrial Policies for a Sustainable Economic Development. And he's pointed to different phases of industrial development. And he did point out that he calls the two lost decades, where policies of the Washington Consensus and structural adjustment shaped policies. And he talks of these as lost decades. He says average economic growth in Africa fell to 2.2% in the 1980s, 2.6% in the 1990s. A manufacturing value addition fell from 17% of GDP in 1981 to 11 to 13% by 1999. He does point out that there's been an uneven and partial return to the adoption of industrial policies, but that adapted to changing global circumstances, but says that these have not yet had the effect of leading the kind of structural transformation that the continent needs. Now, when I was, as I said earlier, I haven't been following a lot of Dave's work on innovation. So I did think it was worthwhile for me to go and look at a few of his pieces. And I think there's one I want to refer to. In 2014, he gave a presentation to the Tide Center at the University of Oxford in the is an action area of market failure in middle-income countries, of which South Africa. And this means that government bonds are all adjusted to yield a positive net return. And this means that they are therefore pretty attractive to resources. That means that those of funds tend to go into government bonds and what he calls well-developed firms, and that investments in stocks and shares are a better and safer and easier option, as well as treasury bills. And so he says that venture capital to support new ventures is greatly lacking, and that there is a serious issue of science, technology, and innovation. And he then goes on to say that in the South African case, there's skill shortages, that anyone, particularly anyone from a historically disadvantaged background, who has any kind of skills in areas of science, technology, and industrial capability, will be snapped up by well-established firms, leading to what he called an innovation chasm. Now, he then goes on to talk about there is therefore a need to strengthen, and I think this is the point that I'm taking out of this. There's a need to strengthen public technology innovation agencies to address what is he defined as a market failure. He talks about some of the challenges that are faced by those agencies. They include limited budgets, and where there are limited budgets, then there's the question of focus. And in South Africa, well, South Africa remains a mining economy, but and you can't avoid the fact that there has been a historical innovation lead in that area. So some resources have to go there too, of the lack of coordination within government, the full problem. And it's not just around innovation, it's around industrial policy, it's around deciding on the priorities of economic policy more generally. And then, of course, the question of innovation, racial inequalities, and trying to support and target particularly innovators coming from historically disadvantaged backgrounds. I want to just turn to make my own little suggestions for the future discussion. I want to turn to a couple of developments. I think that a lot of the focus that there has been on innovation, as I said, I think that I'm sensing this as a response to the changing environment, the environment which was the one of globalization, global value chains, and all of that. And I want to refer to the speech of well-known speech now of Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, at the World Economic Forum earlier this year. You'll recall that Mark Carney spoke of a pleasant fiction, as he called it. For some of us, it wasn't so pleasant, but it certainly was a fiction. The pleasant fiction that there was a rules-based trading system, which he actually said hid the fact that the largest and most powerful economies just opted out when they found it inconvenient to be part of it. And at the same time, it was applied disproportionately and asymmetrically towards others. And I think that is the era that we've come out of. Mark Carney was an insider of that era. So in a way, he's let the cat out of the bag. But he also points out, and he moves on in his speech to talk about how that order is now being ruptured. And I think the DG started to talk about some of that when he was talking about the way in which innovation has become weaponized in national security dominated discourses, which are also what's happened to international trade, where there's weaponization of trade, weaponization of deficits and surpluses, the use of national security justified measures, and so on and so forth. And I think that this is changing the geographic and global configuration of economic relations. Of course, some of this began when we were at the time of COVID, where global supply chains were inadequate and clearly skewed against the developing world when it came to the supply of medical equipment and vaccines. And since then, we've seen things like the shortening of supply chains. We've also seen, I think, an overall weakening of the application of global trade rules. Well, I think that the United States no longer feels itself obliged to abide by absolutely any of them. But you've also had many other countries that have, for example, all the ones who've signed transactional deals with the United States since the Trump tariffs have also effectively opted out, accepted that they can violate during this period of Carney's pleasant fiction, was that rules were significantly stepped up, though that there were much higher bars of recognition of patents. I think in the case of South Africa, we might want to measure that the number of patents that we are registering for our own enterprises, but whatever progress may be being made in that regard, the fact of the matter is, at my time in government, I doubt that it's changed that much. More than 95% of the patents that were were agreed to were international patents that were simply registered without any kind of appraisal or analysis of those patents. Many of these are patents which have implications for local innovation. And I'm making that point because I think that a lot of the innovation that we have seen in successful emerging industrializing economies, including up to China today, have not been reinventions of the wheel. They have not been a great scientific breakthrough that's been discovered in a university. They've often been continuous improvement or Kaizen, those kinds of ideas of existing um, um, technologies and products. And they've often done this, at least at the very margins of the rules on intellectual property. I mean, that was the case of China, of Japan rather. That is the case of China, and it's only as you effectively climb Harjun Chang's ladder that you begin to start to support the idea of stable multipolar global order. So I just wanted to throw those ideas into the mix, while concluding by saying that I think it's very, very appropriate that the seminar is being held in the honor of Dave Kaplan. We have, I think, an underappreciated, highly effective intellectual who has done some very, very serious and important analysis and analytical work over the years, who has attempted to contribute in the policy sphere. In many cases, the usual issue is that we write good policy and we don't implement it afterwards. So I think that there's quite a lot of that to do as well. But I think it's highly appropriate that this seminar is organized in the memory of an outstanding individual who has contributed greatly to the well-being of his country. And I don't think that any one of us can hope that we can achieve any more than that. So I think that we can conclude that Dave's was a life very, very well lived. So thank you very much. And I'm grateful once again for having been given this opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, former Honourable Minister Dr. Rob Davies, for that inspiring tribute. I think I wouldn't even know where to begin to do justice in terms of the high-level inputs that you've made. But I think maybe just to take from the last point that you've made in your comment with the many insights that you've given, and I think it's given some rich thoughts for discussion for the coming panel that will be taking over. I think former minister has really echoed also what the DG has said earlier when I met with the DG this morning, that we need to appreciate our intellects. We need to honor them and the work they do. They contribute towards nation building. Mr. Kaplan, who was born on the 25th of the 3rd, 1948, and left us on the 26th of December 2024. We will then Linda Cross to then take us through with the panel. So let's just appreciate the video. Thank you.
Professor David Kaplan spent most of his career as an economist based at the University of Cape Town. But to define Dave simply as an academic would be incomplete. He was an engaged academic, someone who bridged the gap between economic theory and the real-world implementation of policy. After completing his degrees in Cape Town, Kent, and Sussex, Dave maintained an abiding interest in innovation and the roles played by states and markets in economic growth. His thinking evolved over time. While his early Doctor of Philosophy dissertation focused on the positive role of government in industrial development, he later became critical of a state that became predatory and obstructive. Dave argued that productivity-led growth required a dynamic private sector working together with government and research institutions. Frustrated by policy failures at the national level as chief economist at the Department of Trade and Industry, he turned to regional action. In the Western Cape, he developed a microeconomic development strategy that established effective, independent, public-private implementation institutions. His commitment to science and innovation was unwavering. He coordinated the Green Paper on Science and Technology in the mid-90s and served on the National Council on Innovation. Even later, working from Paris, he advised the International Science Council and focused on venture capital for innovative enterprises, extending his impact beyond South Africa through groups like GlobalX and Afrelix. Yet, at heart, Dave was a family man, warm, supportive, and nurturing. He mentored a wide range of students and valued friendship deeply. He was an academic who not only contributed to the world of ideas but significantly impacted political processes. Professor David Kaplan leaves behind a legacy of rigorous thought and dedicated action. He is remembered not just for what he wrote, but for the world he helped shape.
Thank you. I hope that gave us a nice overview and snippet of the life that we are remembering here today. So without any further ado, let me invite Professor Glenda Kroos to come and moderate our esteemed panel members. Thank you.
Thanks, Annaline. I must say I'm feeling a bit emotional after watching that video, which really illustrates the mensch that Dave was at heart and reinforces the point everyone's been making, that he was the example of the definition of an organic intellectual. And he was certainly a mentor and a critical interrogator and critical friend to me in my work over the last few decades. So thank you for the honor of being here to moderate this panel. And the panel builds directly on the important insights brought by DG on the importance of bridging the industrial and innovation policy and the way Dave was able to do that. And I think taking from Prof Davies' address, we're facing a new era, new questions. Maybe we think that we've got new questions in every era, but I think this time that we're in is extremely challenging, and there are no rules. But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we can't go and reinvent the wheel. So it's really timely that we take time on this panel to look back at the work that Dave has done and how it speaks to our present challenges and how it can help us to define our research and policy agenda going forward, which will, after the panel, Petrus Letaba will be helping us with that role. So we've got a big panel. We've got 9 speakers. They've got 5 minutes each. I'm going to be strict and put on my timer and let it go off after 5 minutes because I know we've all got so much to say in terms of the intellectual contribution and the policy contribution and the personal feelings, but let's respect the time. But what we have here is a range of speakers. We're going to from those call on. I hope you are here. Kaplinsky, collaborators and partners in intellectual crime. He did say he was going to be a little bit late, so I'm not sure. Are you online yet, Prof Kaplinsky? No. Okay, we'll come back to him. So then I'm going to start off with Ilse Kaag, who is from the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. She's worked with Dave for many years, and she's also in her role as NACI counselor. If you can begin with your 5 minutes to draw out the points that you would like to highlight on Dave's contribution to our present challenges.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think my advantage is when I speak first, we all work in more or less the same space, and so definitely we can echo what was already said. There's many things that we might repeat. But for me, working the past 10 years with technology and technological change, and doing research with Prof Kaplan, there are many conclusions that we can make to this work, like the technology that must serve both human and institutional capacities. We also know that from the research that technology is actually disrupting the way in which we innovate. And we are challenged daily with how to do things better. If we look at the research, we can draw from global technological shifts, and that informs our policies. And I think that the research work is better. You are going to Google, you watch a YouTube video, and actually you are collecting information and knowledge that you are going to apply. But what is important, I think, is if you look at leaders, is how the leaders then take that information and how it's applied in organizations, whether it's public or private. In both cases, it is becoming very important to consider what is the impact of technology and technological change on your organization. So it will impact your skills levels in your organization, on how you are going to do business, what systems are you going to put in place that are actually better than your competitor. In the case of the public sector, you want to become more efficient in your service delivery. You can ask the question on how can I do this better by applying technology and embracing technological change. So I think I don't want to dwell on this because I think there's a lot more that the other speakers are going to say also about this. But for me, it's a reminder that such important research work that was done by...
I agree with him and appreciate disagreed. I don't want to go in too much detail with disagreements, but I think he rather overplayed his critique of the state and its role in industrial policy because he was scarred by what he'd observed when working with the DTI and with state capture in South Africa. Okay, so I would like to just point to an areas of discussion I had with Dave, and particularly to an unfinished area of discussion which is not only relevant to South Africa, but as you will hear, has wider global relevance. Point number one, Dave, in the Industrial Strategy Project in the 1990s, made a very important intervention, which was before his time, if you like, or before it became fashionable, which is that South Africa's extreme employment problem could not be met through the industrial sector. The scale of unemployment was so great, and the capacity of the industrial sector to meet that challenge, there was just an enormous disjuncture. So for him, the role of industry in South Africa was to generate the surpluses which might be used to create employment to meet issues of equity in other sectors of the economy. That wasn't a message we all wanted to hear, because in the early 1990s we thought that industrial development would solve all of South Africa's problems, but it was prescient, and it was a discussion which was picked up by Danny Roderick in the decades after the turn of the millennium, and has now become of extreme relevance, which is that manufacturing is not employment intensive. Except in very unusual circumstances, which included export processing zones, where Dave, as you know, had a spell in which he tried to persuade the government to use export processing zones in the Eastern Cape, and he was very disappointed that that route had not been taken. Sectoral challenges entail not just meeting the leading firms. So intersectoral innovation was important, and similarly there was the need for intersectoral structural change, and as you know, Dave was very exercised by the possibilities of high technology in South Africa to stimulate economic growth, and the particular role which venture capital played in that. Now, this tension between the inability of manufacturing to create employment and the need to promote innovation in order to enhance productivity, and that innovation was increasingly labor saving, has left us with all a crisis. It's a crisis which you find in Acemoglu and Johnson's book, not the one that gave them the Nobel Prize, but it's a book which looks at the history of innovation from 2,000 years ago, actually. And what they show is that innovation which generates a surplus, and which that surplus is not distributed more widely through the population, essentially runs into problems of a social and political nature, and the system cannot survive and leads to significant social, political, and structural change. And that's an agenda which is true in South Africa. How to harness the productivity gain in the manufacturing sector, assuming that innovation policy gives you higher productivity, how to appropriate some of those gains and how to spread them. But of course, this is now a global problem. It takes the agenda from the micro and the meso, the micro, the firm, the meso, the sector, to the macro, which is political macroeconomic management. It surfaces in South Africa with great intensity. Dave was an early entrant into these discussions, but this is a challenge which is now of much greater, wider significance. And thank you, Dave.
Since 2002. And I want to highlight that Dave, in this community, he wasn't just a participant of the events of the network, but he was a foundational and intellectual spine of the network, I would say. He brought evidence and voice to the Global South, especially to Africa and especially to South Africa, at a time when the discussions around the role of innovation in economic development were largely shaped by the experiences in the North. It was a very important voice to have in the network at that time. We're talking about 20 plus years, and the literature and the community has evolved a lot since, thanks to the work and the contribution of people like Dave. My own introduction to Dave came before I met him in person. I was a
master's student at the University of Sussex in the UK, and my supervisor at the time, Martin Bell, advised me to contact a real policymaker in South Africa. I was very nervous to email him and to talk to him on the phone. I just called and he just picked up. And he was very sincere in his answers. He took honest interest in the questions, and he responded with being informative and also educational. I remember that interaction really captured something, stayed with me for many years, and I think it captures something essential about Dave, that particularly with emerging with younger scholars, he helped you think more clearly. He gave you access to a world that as a student you think is unreachable, right? Talking to real policymakers. At the time, you know, when you're a master's student and you have to do that kind of work. And all over the years, a couple of decades after, I've seen him doing the same with other scholars as well. Later, I met him at a GlobalX event in South Africa, and I've engaged with him in various projects that's part of a task team, events, and so on. Minerals, a resource course, or a blessing. And Dave's answer, which he developed with colleagues like Mike Morris and around capabilities and linkages. He argued that natural resources themselves are not low-tech by default, and they don't lead to automatically to development. Instead, they hinge on innovation dynamics in learning and in its linkages with the broader economy. He had a whole lot of a body of work on understanding how and can relate to industrial development and come back to the commodity sector. And he argued that these linkages are not just input-output relationships, they are learning relationships. They depend on skills and engineering and design capabilities that are formed and accumulation of competences around firms and also institutions. So some of these ideas came together in a GlobalX thematic review that I encourage everybody to go and read because it's so relevant at this moment in time on natural resources, innovation, and industrial development that he did play a leadership role in developing. And I think, just to conclude, because I hear the alarm, is that he left us with a responsibility, I would say, to keep asking the hard questions in the context of South Africa, to elevate the voice of South Africa and the Global South in these discussions around innovation and development. We are theory builders as well. We bring in a very important dimension that is very important to capture in these geopolitical times. So I really want to thank Dave for his contribution to the literature, to the GlobalX network, and to mentoring a whole range of scholars in the network as well as in AfricaLix. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erica. So, Petrus, I think in our reflection,
participate in the process, and he was a real issue because I don't have much time. The one issue links really closely to this concept of engaged academic, and we've spoken quite a lot about how Dave's work was about engagement. I want to just focus a little bit on the academic component of that. And I think this is really quite important because at heart, Dave was an academic, and in particular, I think UCT was his academic home. And if we think about his role in developing institutional capacity, Rob Davies spoke about the importance of developing and Dave's interest in developing public innovation agencies and strengthening these. Well, actually, he played a critical role in strengthening the institution of the University of Cape Town and the School of Economics in several ways. I mean, firstly, he was key to establishing, for example, the Development Policy Research Unit in 1990 with Alan Hirsch and Dave Lewis. And this is now a very well-known institution. It's changed its focus, less around industry innovation, much more towards labor, but he was one of the founders of that particular institution. He then established the PRISM unit, the Policy Research in International Services and Manufacturing, that I now direct, but Anthony Pirai and Mike Morris before that, he helped establish that, and he saw the gap. They saw the gap in the academic space of institutions that provide solid academic research that would influence and directly engage on key policy issues. So he worked on that interface between academia and policy and very strongly, and he'd built this capacity within the university. On top of that, he then was instrumental in establishing what in our program is the Masters in Economic Development stream within UCT. Again, focusing on a program that would attract students that weren't just interested in sort of classical coursework-based masters in economics, but actually were interested much more on the interface between policy and academia and so on. So these are legacies, actually, because they remain, they grow, and they actually arose in part because of Dave's insights and interests about this field of engaged academic. A second issue I just want to focus about, why was he so effective in these things? And I think he was very effective because he's one of the few academics who actually came in with policy experience. He came in with it from the DTRC. He then worked within provincial government and local government on engaging on policy particular matters. And so was what I was this was manufacturing strategy. I remember having to review it, and I was super critical because it seemed to undermine the importance of employment as a target, a central target of industrial policy. And he was saying, hang on, we need to think about productivity and firm productivity and how to boost this through innovation, etc. And this, in a way, Rafi pointed out, was a recognition that perhaps the manufacturing sector couldn't drive the employment growth process. He was confused and didn't agree with this absolute focus on everything is about employment. He used to tell me a quartet needs 4 players. That's what it needs. You can't have more, and so on. So why I think this is prescient and important is I think one of the key challenges we face in South Africa on this deindustrialization is because our manufacturing firms are still very far from the productivity frontier. And consequently, we are absorbers of international technology. And because we're absorbers of labor-saving international technology, we, in effect, are absorbing foreign technology or higher-level technology, which is reducing jobs per unit output. But we don't have the productivity and the competitiveness to turn that productivity shift into massive growth in sales to offset the loss of jobs. And this productivity demand story, I think, is a key contributor to our inability to compete. I think there were 2 central insights that I found useful. The one is the imported technology project, in a way, emerged because of strong pressures to internalize access to technology, localize access to technology. And he was arguing, and he said, look, we need to think carefully about where we get technology from, yes, but we should not discount the importance of accessing technology from international sources. And so the study focused quite carefully, or quite a lot, on using this firm data to think about what's the relationship between firms and the importation of technology and firm outcomes. We tended to find that there's strong positive associations. Firms that import technology are more productive, etc. And so, but the central message here I think his view would be that we need to think about all ways to make firms productive and innovate. It's not where the technology necessarily comes from critically, but it's whether that technology improves the firm's productivity and innovation. The second project was really about R&D and firm R&D. The data is not great. So the administrative tax data, where we look very carefully, we've got many firms, but actually the reporting of R&D is not that great. And Michael Kahn will probably talk a little bit about those challenges. But nevertheless, I think his key point here was, again, is we should be cautious about being obsessed with developing innovation in-house through R&D. That is super important, but we should think more broadly. And I think one of the insights of that paper, or one of the unanticipated insights, was actually in-licensing was an additional source of productivity improvement. And so, again, this is much innovation is driven more broadly than just by in-house or local sources of technology. It's in many cases, it's about actively engaging firms participating in the global environment and sourcing technology and know-how from all sources, not just local. including international. That was my take a little bit of some of those 2 key points. And I think it differs a little bit from some of the other presenters. So I raise those so we can sort of engage, discuss some of these points.
We work on a project together looking at the role of small businesses and how they use technology, their understanding of innovation. And we together, we did some field work. He was obviously the supervisor, and I, as a young researcher, went out to interview a lot of companies. And he joined in some of those interviews, which he loved. He found it very important to engage with companies to understand what they were saying from their own perspective. And it's something that I've always carried with me, the benefits of regularly talking to people who are impacted by our government policies, so that you understand things from their perspective as well. And it was an area of that he was passionate about. And it was, so Dave had a long association with TIPS. He was a TIPS research fellow. He attended some of our conferences and he spoke at some of our events. Again, wasn't shy to raise some of the things he was thinking around, and I think Rafi touched on one of them around the role of jobs in industry, which at the time when he spoke at one of the TIPS conferences was a puzzle to the DTRC. But he was quite emphatic that we need to think differently about how we understand where the jobs will come from, and the role of industry in that. So we collaborated over the years, and he was a mentor to many young people at TIPS. He provided insight, he commented on their research paper, but he also collaborated with us on research. And one of the papers, the last one that he worked on with us, was looking at the role of small startup firms in the high-tech sector and the difficulties that they faced in accessing finance. And we together brought together a range of different players with ideas, with innovative approaches, turn into much bigger. He had a strong case around that. Yeah, I mean, there's many more things that I'm going to say, but let me stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we focused quite a lot on the industrial policy side and the firms and technological development side. But if we want to bridge the divide, we have to put the spotlight equally on the innovation policy side. So I'm going to shift to that now. And I'm first going to invite Professor Michael Kahn. I think you have worked for many decades with Dave. I saw a picture of you there looking very young. And I think you wanted to reflect on his role in the early developments of innovation policy, and particularly in working with the Canadians. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's an honor, a sad honor to be involved in this seminar. Listening very carefully and modifying a bit of what I was going to say. Yes, Glinda, Dave played a very important role in the early 1990s. He was a member of the South African Association for Canadian Studies, and I suspect that provided the avenue for interaction through the IDRC, with whom Dave was engaged right through to his life. Notably, Dave was pivotal in the mission to think about a future South African S&T policy, which you can find on the IDRC website, Volume 3, Building a New South Africa, Science and Technology. Through his network, all the major players across the system of innovation. Innovation has always been there in one way or another. It wasn't a 1994 invention. It's worth looking at that because there's a lot of history that he covers in what in fact became a publication that was presented to President Mandela. And I want to just read you two things very quickly. President Mandela wrote the foreword, very short, it was a half a page. And he writes there, and I'm quoting, "I remember the advice given to me by one of the international members of the mission, Dr. Thomas Odiambo, head of the African Academy of Sciences, about how important our future investments are in the area of S&T, and how many African countries are only now realizing that they would have been further along the path of economic development had they recognized, following independence, the importance of investments in this area." Dave Kaplan was then given the task of writing the afterword, which is no shorter than, 8 pages. And he goes on to summarize that the mission contributed to the longer-term debate on S&T, although here its impact has been far more limited. In part, the situation was inevitable because the mission was never intended to be a policy blueprint. I recommend the House to take a careful look. Sorry, why my voice is going, I don't know. So I've covered the first point. The second, he was also the leader of the task team toward the green paper on S&T, and that's when we got to know another very well. In terms of personal influence, with Jean-Baptiste Meyer and Mercy Brown, Dave Kaplan initiated the first serious study on brain drain, which we then took into the HSRC, where it became a publication, Flight of the Flamingos, and then later the study into the mobility of the highly skilled moths, which we did at UWC, so thank you, Dave. But now I want to go to this whole area of data, which Lawrence Edwards alluded to, and that is how important it is for the policy advisor, let alone the policymaker, really to understand the data and the flaws in the data. So we've heard reference in passing here to lost technologies, innovation chasms, and the woes of the patent system and the perils of administrative data. They're all true. And much of the responsibility for the woeful state of this data rests with conservatism. Mr. Davis might take note of systems as we do. So let's do our best to get the data right. And as Lawrence noted, your brilliance and econometrics to data where there are flaws, because one has to then, using the basic accounting system or the SARS database, dutifully anonymized, you have to be sure that the data fields relating to R&D have full meaning. Dave was on top of this. One of the big issues that everyone worries about, is technology balance of payments. And he was very strong in saying it doesn't matter what you pay, it's what you do with it. So I recognize a very important contribution. Will you allow me to put up a picture quickly,
yes, of course.
Glenda? Is it possible?
Yes, please.
Let's see if I can get it. There it is. Okay, come to me. Share. Okay, got you. There it is. You can see, Dave, where a city that he really loved. That is outside the Ministry of Higher Education and Research in the Latin Quarter, where I spent a wonderful morning with Dave back last July. And there's the man, and it points to his deep interest in international relations and S&T. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for that, Michael. Very, very poignant picture that sums up a lot. I think we're going to move to you now, David Walwyn, and continue in the STI policy space and your work with Dave in the evolution of our STI policy over the last 3 decades.
Thank you so much, Glenda, and good morning to everyone. Hope you can hear me. Just checking, am I okay? Audible?
Perfect.
Great. I'm terrified of that buzzer, so I'm hoping that I can make it before you buzz me.
Well, note,
but I just want to say, I mean, it was interesting listening to the other speakers, and particularly Rafi when he talked about his relationship with David Kaplan. Like many of the panel members, I knew David Kaplan as a colleague and as a friend. We disagreed frequently as colleagues, but we remained steadfast friends, which says a lot about the maturity with which Dave approached his relationships, especially his role as an academic and policy analyst. So in the short time that I have available, we've covered, many of you will be familiar with Dan. So the three key points, and I'll say these slowly. The inherent market failure of industry is to encourage private investment. And that's an aspect that has become a thread through all of the work that we've heard. A clear framework of how the state will acquire the necessary knowledge and skills to support such industries. So the importance of building the capability within the state to understand what are the important things and stimulating R&D and stimulating firm-level innovation. And then the third point, which has also been referred to, is a significant effort on nurturing local competence and embedding local firms in global production networks with capability and suitable sources of finance. So those three key areas: market failure, the importance of capability within the state, and then the priority of embedding local firms in global production. And just in terms of the last one, Dave and I worked recently on an evaluation or a gap analysis for the Technology Innovation Agency, and Dave was insistent in this work that the acid test for local innovation will always be the impact of local firms on international markets. He advised that we should worry less about the extent to which firms implemented incremental innovation-based products and services within local markets. Real success, he emphasized, lies elsewhere, on the competitive stage of international markets. In my second input, I just wanted to comment on Dave's contribution to SDI policy in a narrower sense, and it's an anecdotal discussion about his professional standards. I remember at one point that I asked him to review a book I was writing on the CSIR, a book that never saw the light of day, but maybe one day will. But in his feedback to me, Dave had these words. He said, "I have a reputation for being a very harsh critic and very blunt, so please interpret my remarks in that light. As you will see, I have two reservations. The first, I think, is you are far too expressive of your own ideological position, and as a result, the paper has the danger of being read in this way. Someone who regards the period prior to 2000 as years of the single-minded pursuit of neoliberalism as a PR praised are illogical statements devoid of the complexity and the validity of their context. As I mentioned in my contribution to Dave's memorial site, Dave was strategic and highly structured in asking difficult or even unpopular questions and unwavering on standards. With a sharp intelligence and acuity of mind, he could find gaps in any theoretical argument and then propose ways in which the narrative could be strengthened. He was a powerful mind and a wonderful person, two aspects or attributes which are often not combined in a single person. And for that alone, he will always be in my mind and in my memory. With your permission and with the permission of the buzzer, I want to end with a small quote from a newspaper article about Dave's father, who was Arthur Kaplan. And I'm only repeating this because I think it tells us a little bit about Dave himself. The article, dating from the 1950s, was a campaign manifesto written by Arthur for basically a brief CV. And he was standing then in the then Bulawayo as a candidate for the political party, the National Unifying Force. The article notes that for light relief, Arthur writes brilliant vitriolic political letters to the press, which nobody bothers to read, and which serve mainly to embarrass all those with the same name as himself. I see Dave in this paragraph and in others in that CV, a sense of humor, but also a sense of desperation that the sage advice which he gave in such abundance, with such generosity and with such clarity, was often ignored. Perhaps this seminar will turn that around. Colleagues, it'll never be too late. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dave. I think all of us in this room have been at the receiving end of some of those harsh critiques and have all benefited from them, as you say, from the sage advice. So thank you for that generational picture as well, which is, I'm sure Mark's chuckling at that one. So we're going to shift now just to briefly consider Dave's influence in our continent and in the global south and globally. Can I please invite Anne Kingiri, who has been the Secretary General of the Africa Licks Network, to give her contribution. Thanks, Anne.
Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Yes, and hi everyone. I will be switching off my camera because of the network where I am, but I'll be speaking on scholars on innovation and development called Africarix, and I'm speaking concerning the support that they've provided for this network. He was the founding pillar of Africarix Networks from 2012 in Dar es Salaam when we first launched it, all the way to Mozambique in 2013, where we consolidated our research themes. And one of the themes was on natural resources and resource costs. It did not peak so much, but we have seen how much that particular theme has grown over the years. And therefore, I'm speaking in terms of where from 2012 and where we are now. The network is telling me it's unstable, but let me just switch off this. So I'll be talking about, first of all, how he has grounded the innovation scholars thinking around innovation and development, and since 2012 and where we are, but specifically on his role as in mentoring young scholars, early career scholars, particularly PhD students, and how he has mentored them. And one of them, who is an economist, is Dr. Abdi, who has become quite influential as an academic and policy in Ethiopia. So quite a number of mentors, mentees that he has carried through. But in particular, I want to mention when he spoke as a keynote speaker in 2017 in Oran, and his topic was on natural resources for innovation in Africa. And on that particular topic, he responded to 3 issues that have continued to inspire the network in terms of consolidating key themes that speak to the issues, the challenges of natural resources dependence and how they work against development in Africa. The macroeconomic factors that he spoke to, and those ones, I don't want to talk about that, but the institutional factors, mainly the propensity for the state capture and the resource rents and related politics that he brought out. And this has continued to inspire some of the scholars because that particular issues, the institutional issues have become much more complex and in connection with the global value chains dynamics and the conversations that have inspired quite a number of researchers. And we have now a thematic continues to provide the contextual answers and of resources and vice versa. So that particular thematic area is actually providing the context to the answer that they've continued to seek over the years. So during that particular conference, he also spoke about the technological factors in terms of the technological capacities that are associated with natural resources and innovation. And he spoke about issues of linkages, how linkages can be deepened, the role of the domestic and local capabilities, and the role how we can raw technologies can be optimized, and how we can address the issue of spread of effects. Again, this particular theme that some of the scholars have picked, it is being pursued under the banner of global value chain and innovation development. And some of the scholars have continued to see the relevance of the local capabilities building and the entry point in some of the thematic areas like renewable energy, how the raw contact requirement can actually be an entry point to building the local capabilities, particularly in the low income countries. Then the other thing he has inspired is on how we can increase linkages through collaborations. And one of the thematic areas is actually doing that, drawing on the different collaborations in the South and in the North, and how the natural resources and innovation that are associated with technology advance and which have effect across different sectors and activities. But this area needs to be explored further, and this is something that we are building on, and in connection with the particularly renewable energy theme and the role of the policy mixes. And I think his legacy continued to for this opportunity, and I can mention for now many other things I can, how far we have come with him, and of course how we will, and of course how we will continue to get inspired. Back to you, Greta.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anne. And I think it is really important to reiterate the continental and global influence that Dave had on other countries in similar situations to South Africa, which links to the idea of building theory that comes out of our context. So our final speaker, not last but not least, is Professor KJ Joseph, who is the Secretary General of the Globelix Network, of which AfricaLix is a regional part. KJ, over to you for your 5 minutes. Thank you for your patience. I hope he's still here. KJ Joseph? Okay. Well, I think Erica, on behalf of the Globelix community in the network, has situated her contribution in the important role Dave played in Globelix, in growing the network, in capacity building, in shaping the debates, in identifying themes for research focus. So, with that, we have come to the end of our prepared contributions. I have a few moments. I've been a very good timekeeper. Thank you, everyone. And let's open to the floor. Annaline, we have about 10 minutes. Is that correct? We have about 10 minutes to take questions, comments, elaborations, your own contributions. It can be from the floor and online. Is somebody monitoring the chat? I don't know if there's any contributions in the chat you would like to read out or share, so that the audience in the room can also hear those. Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
It's Jennifer speaking. May I please say something?
Of course.
I have asked Dave Lewis to read a message from the family later today, but when I wrote that, I did not really have a very good insight into how the proceedings would go today. And I really just want to thank the organizers and speakers and all contributors I feel very touched, in fact, overwhelmed by your commitment to Dave's memory in so many different ways. But what the last hour or so has been for me is a reincarnation of the very wide-ranging many projects and people that Dave has mentioned in our home over the years. And I have today had a much deeper understanding of the context and, in fact, the significance of these projects, because he never led me to really understand the latter, how important these were. And I was struck by what Erica said about the privilege for her as a young student of having access to the real world out there that she was aspiring to enter. For Dave, it was something similar. He felt a great privilege as an academic in South Africa to have access to the fabric of society, to the politicians, to the institutions, and indeed to the very hungry and keen students that he taught. And I remembered when Erica was speaking, a comment that he made occasionally to me, that if he had been an academic, an economics professor in any other developed country, he would still be teaching macroeconomics to classes of 500 students as his main occupation. So I just wanted to convey that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. I have a question online or a comment online from Alan Hirsch, and then one in the room from Dave Lewis. Go ahead, Alan. Oh. Well, while Alan's working out his technical challenges, Dave, go ahead. Just press the button and it'll, on the,
hello, who I don't know if he's about to speak or has already spoken, but I'm sorry, I missed some of. And then later, I'd gone into government. Dave joined government as the very closely with him at that point, and I've always enjoyed working with Dave. He's, as many people have said that I've heard, always intellectually challenging, has strong opinions, and he's not afraid to express them, very often right, very often proved right a long time later. I agreed actually with a number of the points that Rafi perhaps disagreed with Dave at the time. And thanks to Rafi for joining from the UK. Rafi's known him for much longer than I did. But I loved working with Dave, and I loved the opportunity to be his friend from time to time when we were in the same place at the same time. Thank you, Glenda.
thank you, Alan. Dave Lewis, over to
Thank
you.
you, Glenda. You know, one thing about Dave is that he never identified himself as an economist. It was always as an economic historian. And I'm pleased that that Rob Davies started his survey of Dave's work by referring to his PhD thesis, which I think was really Dave at his finest in many ways, because it was Dave as a historian. And anybody who'd been to visit Dave in Paris and been taken on one of his tours of the area in which he lived will have seen his extraordinary appreciation of living in a city whose history was so in your face, as it were. And he always saw himself as an economic historian and thought, and I agree with him, that the only way to understand economics, to understand economies, is through economic history. And the second reason why it was like that, and we had in common our interest in history, though we were both notionally economists. But the second reason for that is that neither of us did mathematics. And we got trained before economics became a field. Yeah, and there are two that I'm interested in. Some are old friends, but some through Dave, who are involved in venture capital. to be very successful, with reservation, others would know more than me about this, at dealing with high-level, high-technology startups, particularly as it happens in the Cape Town, Stellenbosch area, where the constraint seems to be finance. It seems to be capital, and so venture capital firms have been very successful in overcoming that constraint. But where are the middle firms between the startups and the informal traders? Where are those middle firms that can become the recipients of an industrial policy to improve their and enhance their competitiveness? I don't know how to identify them. I don't know where they are, and I don't know if the constraint is always capital. And I wonder what the other constraints are, and if anybody has any thoughts on that. Infrastructure, other things that would help them overcome the obvious the constraints that they obviously face. And the other question that I had, on this productivity front, I remember when we did the industrial strategy project, in one of the first meetings, Dave said to us, this project is not about employment creation, it's about productivity enhancement. And I, and Errol to some extent, were the link people with the unions who we were working for. And we had to go and convey to them this bad news, which I think we never really honestly did, because we would have been booted out of the room immediately. But, in the end, he was proved right. But I want to ask Rob Davies particularly, who mentioned the Mark Carney paper, which I found a really exciting intervention. And I know Dave and I, with countries that he talks about on it as needs, where does that?
Thank you for articulating the question well. I am mindful of the time, and I see there's one more hand. Can I take Mike Morris? And then Dr. Davies can respond. Thank you. Mike Morris?
Hi, can you hear me? I am not sure how to show my face.
Okay, just show your voice. We can all recognize it.
I was not going to speak, but Lawrence has been hacking me on the WhatsApp and to say that it's not right that I don't. I've known Dave longer than anybody, except for Mark. I've known him for 60 years, and I worked with him as a student radical and as an intellectual academic for most of that time. I didn't want to speak here because Ntabe Singh asked me to be the main speaker, and I said it wasn't right. I didn't interact with Dave around innovation and this world of science and technology. It was I found it much too dry for my non-economist taste. And I just didn't relate very much. I argued with him about it, but it was by no means anything of depth that the two of us interacted with. I knew Dave in the broader senses of his intellectual experience. And that was in terms of political activism. The article about me as the sycophant of Palancis, but actually I was introduced to sycophant of Palancis, but actually I was introduced to Palancis by Dave. And I always found Dave really interesting, talking to him about politics, about political economy, about history, as Dave Lewis has said. And I think that I wish, and I've said this to him, I wish he'd written more on those broad areas where he knew such a lot. And I so much enjoyed interacting with him. There will be a seminar at UCT which PRISM is organizing, and I'd rather talk then about industrial policy and the work that Dave and I did together and what I learned from him, and hopefully some of the things he may have learned from me. But I thank the DSDI very much for what they've done today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Can I take one more before I give Prof. Davey? Avril?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have a mic. Can you hear me?
There's a mic.
Hi. I want to just add a very quick addition to the areas of interest and influence that Dave had. I met him when I was in sort of industrial sociologist, and I was young at UCT as a junior lecturer when I needed to be back in Johannesburg for an emergency, and he called me in the days before cell phones, traced me to my then boyfriend's family home and said, there's only a week left of term, don't come back, spend your time with your boyfriend, I'll teach for you. And I was so grateful. And then later on he said, oh, by the way, what are you teaching? And I think that was just Dave's ability to cross boundaries and be an interdisciplinary scholar. And he came into my sociology program, taught the class, and I'm grateful it was only a week long because I would have lost all my students to him because they just loved him. And that was, for me, what Dave sort of epitomized. He just was always there for younger scholars. And then later on, my world of work has moved me into cultural industry policy. And when Dave was working for the Western Cape government,
Program director, I'm taking a little bit longer because I think. Rob Davies, would you like to respond to the question posed by Dave Lewis?
Yes, I would. And I would also just like to recall, since Mike Morris mentioned, one of the highlights of my early life as a student, I recall, was going on a visit to Paris with Dave and with a Cypriot a colleague at Sussex University, and we went to go and see Nikos Balansas. And we stayed in the residence of one of the leaders of Paris 68, who I only found out after we were there for a while. So it was a very, very intriguing visit that Dave actually organized for us. So I just wanted to recall that. But I think the question that Dave Lewis was raising is, in fact, a very profound one. I see us as in a long-term and highly contested transition from the unipolar global order that was constructed at the end of the Cold War, but which was also prefigured by the changes which took place in the US and the UK in the 1980s. If we're in transition from that into a world order that will inevitably be more multipolar, but its shape is being contested. So I think that from the side of the erstwhile global hegemon, the United States under the Trump administration, we do see some recognition of multipolarity, but I think that what they want is they want to see this entirely in terms of two or three, and I think it's three in their estimation, global powers, China, Russia, and themselves, and they want to be the first among the equals. They want to reinforce all of this with spheres of influence and stuff like that. And I think it's a very, very interesting contestation that we're seeing now between a simple trade arrangement into becoming a construction of regional value chains in of more value-added activity. And I think that this is beginning to create all kinds of opportunities that I think we need to become part of. And this means that in South Africa, I think we need to start to look to the continent as much more than just a market. We need to look at it as a partnership arrangement that's coming into being, which, if we play our cards right, can be a significant vehicle which could propel us to what it seems to me is both deeper and also more inclusive industrialization across the continent. So I think this is what I would say is our first anchor. I think the second anchor has to be that we need to be forming coalitions for development. I mean, we are essentially still a developing country. We are part of a developing region. And so I think that we need to be turning to our relations with other countries. I think there are institutions already in place, BRICS. We need to recognize, I think, that China is a global power already, a global technology leader. It doesn't mean that we just have to follow their agenda, but I think that there is value from BRICS, not least because I think that BRICS is beginning to develop and prefigure alternative institutions, which I think could be very, very important in the world. And we need also to contest, I think, the reform and the restructuring of the entire multilateral architecture, because at the moment it's been cast aside. But I think it's been cast aside, and in most of the institutions that I'm aware of, there are also ongoing struggles and discussions about reform, which mean, I think, very, very different things. Structure it into the needs and interests of the erstwhile hegemon and its allies, or alternatively, are they going to become tools for inclusivity and development? And I think these are the times we're living in. Highly contested, highly volatile, susceptible to anything that could be seriously disruptive. I mean, if we have a war in Iran in the next few days, which is a real possibility, let's not underestimate the impact that will have on us as part of the global economy. We will be caught in all sorts of very, very, I think, important spillovers. So I would say that's the direction we're moving in. I think this has implications for every area of policy, because I think that when the cat was let out of the bag, what I think we can see now is that while we were told during the era of unipolarity that simply conform to the systems in place, the policy frameworks in place, and a pathway for you to develop and solve all the problems of poverty among your people is open to you, we can see that that's not the case, that they are now greatly regretting that they allowed China to lift millions and hundreds of millions of its people out of poverty, and seem to be determined not to allow any of the rest of us to follow that path as well. If we want to follow that path, we're going to have to do it in different and radically different ways. So that's what I would say to that question. But let me then just finish off by thanking all the participants. I think there have been some very, very important insights that have been made by the rest of the participants, and also once again for inviting me to be part of this.
Thank you. On behalf of everyone online, on behalf of everyone in the room, on behalf of the DSTI and NACI, on behalf of the family, let me thank our 9 panelists and our keynote speaker for sparking this look back to bring ideas into the present to help us to move forward. Thank you very much. We'll now have a tea break, I believe.
Now let's give Professor Glenda and the panel another round of applause. Thank you very much. And we do acknowledge the contributions made online. This is being streamed live, so we will keep this, and we acknowledge everybody that has contributed online. We're going to take a policy items that came out of the discussions, but also the key reflections and questions that were highlighted from the various speakers. The idea is not for him to summarize the entire talks of everybody, but really just to give a high-level reflection on those key important policy issues that were highlighted during the various interventions. Over to you, Professor Letaba.
Thank you very much, the acting CEO. Good morning to everybody. I hope it's before 12 o'clock. Maybe I should just do it in my language, Dumelang. My job is easy. I think I will categorize my summary in 4 areas. The first area will be in terms of the economic policy, what our speaker said about him. It will be about the industrial policy. It will be about the innovation policy. It will be about his contribution as a scholar. Finally, about his personality. I think there are a lot of good reflections there. Starting with the economic policy, we learned about Prof Kaplan starting from his PhD. He wanted to understand the role of state in the development of the productive forces in South Africa. So his quest to understand the role of state, it was driven by a number of policy questions or policy issues. One of the issues he observed was the issue of higher unemployment, the issue of the dependency on the commodities. There was a reflection that he saw that as a distraction to most of the African countries. We will talk more about higher technology, medium technology, and so on. But also the role of technology and technology change, especially in the competitiveness of our industries, the way the technology change, the nature of skills that are needed, the nature of organizations, and so on. So that was on the economic policy. But moving on, his interest further developed into the industrial policy. So we know initially he studied the role of state in the industrial development. But we were told that after he was the chief economist at the DTI, he was very unhappy with the competency of the state or the performance of the state. So that led him to the conclusion that no, the state is not necessarily a good driver of industrial competitiveness. He saw the industries or the business sector as the primary driver for the industrial competitiveness. However, the business on their own, he realized that they cannot flourish. Hence, the state need to provide the enabling environment. So that was highly emphasized. So it's the issue that the state cannot create jobs or employment. The industry can, but the state should provide a good enabling environment. So that was about the industrial policy. On the same industrial policy, so he realized the weak point of state in supporting the large companies or the conglomerates at the expense of the SMMEs, which was one of the areas that he was passionate about, especially the higher technology SMMEs, how they can drive competitiveness. It was his conclusion that when he looked at manufacturing companies, the large industries, to say they don't have the potential to absorb all the higher rate of unemployment. But it was his belief that through the SMMEs, we can be able to address those issues like the higher unemployment. So the conglomerates, they create the monopolies and the oligopolies, which is not good to address the challenges of unemployment and inequality. Then Dave moved on to the innovation policy. So realizing the challenges of economic policy, the industrial policy. So he realized that role of technology in terms how technological change affects the industries. So that led to him leading the policy discourse in the late 90s, especially that IDRC study that we were told about. So the main contribution in those early days was in drafting the science and technology green paper, where he was able to work with the likes of Prof Michael Kahn. On innovation policy, Dave warned about, so you need technology. He realized you need technology, but he warned about obsession with their own research and development. So it's not about your own developed technology, but also recognizing the importance of the external technology, which we saw through his study as part of the NACI project also on the imported technologies. So, yeah, I think it was on the industrial policy, the importance of speaking to those people that are affected by technology. Through his work as a consultant, as a scholar, he has done a lot of work on the ground in speaking to those people that are affected. So he was more on the impact of technology, the impact of industrial policy, the impact of the economic policy. Even when he was at NACI, we trusted him a lot with the section on the economic impact. So he was more about the impact, how these things come together and make the impact. Then it was more about his contribution as a scholar, mainly at the University of Cape Town, where we was told he was key in developing the Development Policy Research Unit and later the PRISM, the policy unit. He contributed to the development of the Masters in Economic Development qualification. He organized the UCT Symposium on Technology and Industrial Policy. At the Globelix, we were told he believed in equitable partnership. He was not just a participant, but he contributed to the Global South discourse in terms of Globelix, and also he was highly credited as the founding Secretary General of the Africa Leagues, which is part of the Globelix. So in terms of his scholarly work, he was also credited for being a good mentor. We heard from Professor Erika Mbula. When she was at Success, they say the real policy maker is there in South Africa, which is Dave. So he was underground policy maker. So through his scholarly work and consulting work, doing a lot of work around that, but mentoring people, not only Prof. Erika, but there was also from TIPS, where he did a lot of mentoring. We heard from Saul. Also at the UCT, at the Africa Leagues, he did a lot of mentoring. So he was not only the contributor in terms of industrial, economic policy, innovation policy, but he also contributed in building the human capital. I will conclude by his personality. Personally, I have worked very close with him from 2013. I remember the first time I worked with him, I drafted some sections. Then he reviewed them. It was read all over. I told my wife, I was very frustrated to say, what is this? So I think we were cautioned by Prof. David Valvain to say when we worked with him, you needed not to wear your heart on the sleeves. There was another speaker who said, I was not always agreeing with him. I think what we heard about him, it was that he did not like simplistic conclusion on issues. He wanted to encourage understanding of the complexity of the issues. So you cannot just come with a simple solution. I know at NACI we normally draft the South African STI indicators report. We will be confident that we have a final report. We are taking it to the NACI Council. Dave will say, I don't think we are done. We are 60%. But we had to learn to say he's a good critic, but you need to select all those good inputs. I think himself, one speaker said to say, I know I'm a big critic. I can be a harsh critic. So you needed to understand that personality. If you don't understand it, you could easily quit the work to say, no, I can never be perfect. But he challenged people to say, most problems are not simplistic, they are complex. You need to think and think until we try to find the best solution. Even when you find the best solution is not yet perfect, there is 40% of work to be done on top of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Letaba. Let's give him another round of applause. I think you did an excellent summary of all the vast contributions from very diverse panelists that we had, but all speaking in unison in terms of the key issues, but also the interactions with Professor Kaplan. So I'd like to then, the DG has given his apology. He had to go to another engagement which he had at 11:30. So I'd like to then invite Ms. Ilse Krach, who's also a NACI Council member, and for us to hand over the token and of appreciation to the family. We're going to hand it over to David Lewis as part of our appreciation from the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation and the National Advisory Council on Innovation. Just to say this is for all the time you've given us to spend with Prof, and the time that is given not only to us as institutions, but to South Africa as a nation. And we hope that as you display it in your homes, back home, you'll just know that you will forever and forever be remembered in everything that we do in South Africa. So, Ms. Ilse Krach, and then we'll just invite David just for us to give Refila.
So I'm going to read something written by Jennifer on behalf of herself, Daniel, their son, and my favorite member of the Kaplan family, Julia. And this is not going to be easy. I have to say, I miss Dave like crazy. And I still find myself reading things in the newspaper, of which I'm a bit of a junkie, and thinking, I have to send that to Dave. We're going to be talking about it, and I can't quite bring myself to remove him from my contact list. But be that as it may, it wasn't. We didn't think that this would happen this way around. In his futile quest to stop me drinking so much, smoking altogether, doing some exercise, sleeping, we always thought he was going to outlive me by many, many years. And so this kind of thing happens. But
Anyway, this is Jennifer's message to this. She says, "I want to begin by saying how deeply moved I am that the DSTI has chosen to honor David in this way. In his humility, David would never have imagined or sought this kind of recognition, but I know he would have been so touched to see colleagues and friends gathered here, reflecting on the breadth and depth of his professional engagement. You've spoken much of Dave's contribution to science, technology, and innovation policy in South Africa, and David as an academic and teacher. You have made much of his sharp and incisive intellect. I'm sure that is all true. For us, his family, these qualities were evident beyond his profession. David had a rare ability to enter into almost any conversation and enrich it, whatever the subject: economics, politics, history, poetry, philosophy, or psychology. He brought something relevant and carefully considered to the table. This made him a great travel companion, dinner raconteur, and social networker. In short, he was very good company. But what defined him most was not just the range of his knowledge, but the way in which he engaged. Dave had a profound interest in the person talking to him. He listened closely. Conversations could be about complex intellectual debates of the small details of everyday life, but he gave them the same attention. In his presence, people felt heard. David approached his academic responsibilities seriously. Amongst these, mentorship mattered a great deal to him. He would spend long evenings writing detailed comments on students' drafts. Some may have found him exacting. He certainly held high standards, but these standards came from a place of generosity. He wanted his students to think clearly, argue with integrity, and be able to defend their work with confidence. The same commitment showed up in other ways, like the hours spent reviewing abstracts for Africa Licks congresses, determining that emerging scholars be given fair and rigorous consideration. In preparing for those meetings, it was clear he cared about advancing people, not just research. That interest in younger generations extended well beyond the university. He was genuinely curious about our friends' children and our children's friends, their ideas, their ambitions, their confidence. He celebrated their success. Our own children, Daniel and Julia, sometimes joked that they were not entirely sure whether their friends were visiting our home to spend time with them or with David. David also had an irrepressible zest for life. He loved banter, was playful, and sometimes even embarrassingly silly. I can attest to that. He joined ping-pong beer games at our kids' parties, watched soccer with youthful enthusiasm, and has been seen more than once dancing in the streets of Paris. At Julia's 21st birthday, held in our garden, he decided to improve the ambience by sticking hibiscus flowers stolen from our neighbors' trees onto our non-flowering potted varieties, a stunt that has become family legend. Alongside the fun, David genuinely cared about the impact of his work. Towards the end of his career, he would reflect on whether he would retire having truly made a difference. When asked to give an example of how he would measure this, the answer was simple. Had he contributed to job creation, opened up opportunities, had a hand in something tangible that improved people's lives? I suspect his influence ran deeper than he ever truly recognized. Thank you for honoring David today and for publicly reflecting on the principles and themes that shaped his professional life. I know he would have been more focused on the quality of the discussion than on being its subject. A seminar dedicated to his legacy is indeed a fitting tribute. So thank you all who have contributed to this event, from Jennifer, Daniel, and Julia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for reading that on behalf of the family. And once again, we thank the family for joining us and being part of this. We would have never convened this without the family being part of this. So thank you very much to the family also that has been with us since this morning. It's sad that we've come to the end of the seminar, but like we said, the conversation will continue beyond today. We'll continue to remember Prof's legacies in the work we do, the work we continue to do. From NACI's side, definitely, the work will continue as the flagship report, which the DG mentioned this morning, the flagship report on South Africa's STI indicators, continues to be an annual report that we publish. And I think it will be befitting that the next report we dedicate a chapter to his legacy. So we'll ensure that we remember him in one of the chapters in the 2026 report. So let me then invite my colleague, Dr. Ntsane, who's from the NACI Secretariat, who's also worked with Prof, to give us a vote of thanks. And then I will come back to officially close. Over to you, Dr. Ntsane.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morgan. Good afternoon, colleagues, guests, members of the Kaplan family, and ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to deliver this vote of thanks as we conclude this important seminar in tribute to Professor David Kaplan. I have had the honor of working with him for the past 10 years, and Dr. Matigizela, who's here, was also part of our team on the bioeconomy audits. And pre-corona days, when we used to have meetings in person, I would always be the one to drive with him to his residence. So I learned some few things when there was only the two of us. But now let me begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to our Director General, Dr. Cele, whose vision and leadership made this tribute possible. He reminded us that we must celebrate and recognize our intellectuals within the national system of innovation while they are still with us and even after they have departed. He also highlighted the growing urgency of understanding the securitization of science in a world where knowledge, technology, and innovation are increasingly strategic. We'd like to thank him for setting the tone and purpose of today's reflection. We also want to extend our appreciation to our program director, the NACI acting CEO, Ms. Morgan, for two things: for her professionalism and for keeping us on time. Thank you very much. We extend our deep gratitude to former Minister, Dr. Rob Davis, for his comprehensive and thoughtful professional tribute. By drawing on Professor Kaplan's published work, you reminded us that his influence was grounded in rigorous scholarship that shaped debates and practice in both policy, innovation, and structural transformation in South Africa. As we have learned today, people who have talked have said that his strength was able to put together the people in academics and people in policy. That was his main strength, and we will forever miss that. Also, the video tribute that followed was both moving and very thoughtful. It reminded us that behind policy frameworks and academic publications and papers and discourses, there was a person whose work had real impact, both nationally and globally. And it put people together, both in government and in universities. Our sincere thanks go to the panelists who offered rich reflections on Professor Kaplan's legacy in policy and practice, from science, technology and innovation policy in South Africa to industrial policy, innovation policy, and structural transformation and global engagement. The diversity of institutions and individuals represented on the panel speaks to the breadth of his intellectual reach and collaborative spirit. Professor Letaba, thank you very much for synthesizing the key insights from what was a wide-ranging and thoughtful discussion and helping us to distill the central themes emerging from this dialogue. And to the DG in his absence, we'd like to thank him for the gift that we saw that Ms. Gach and Ms. Annelien handed over to the family. Thank you for that dignified recognition in remembrance of Prof Kaplan. To the Kaplan family, we extend our heartfelt appreciation for being with us today. Thank you for your words and for allowing us to share in honoring Prof Kaplan's legacy with you. His contribution to scholarship and policy is deeply valued, and we recognize that such contributions are made possible by the support from his family. Your loss is our loss. As we close, perhaps the most meaningful way to honor Professor Kaplan is not only through tributes like this, but through the continuation of his life's work. We should continue to think deeply about the questions that matter, about industrialization, innovation, and structural transformation, and of course, South Africa's place in the changing world. We should continue to ask the difficult questions, the rigorous research questions, the kind that Professor Kaplan consistently posed, questions that challenge assumptions, demand evidence, and push us beyond the obvious. We must also reflect seriously on the future of our intellectual community, how we sustain excellence within the national system of innovation, and how we ensure that the next generation of scholars and scientists is prepared to carry his work forward. Finally, thank you to the organizing team and everyone who worked behind the scenes to make this seminar possible, and to all participants for your engagements and presence. Thank you very much, and we hand over to the program director.
Thank you, Dr. Nsani, for that very excellent vote of thanks. And I think, and I'm happy that you've highlighted the organizing team. Without the organizing team, none of this would have been possible. We thank the DG's office, led by Ms. Ntabiseng Msomi. We thank Precious Lukele, also from the DG's office, who contributed. We thank the team at NACI, Ms. Tina Marakala, Lindile Andons, Dr. Nsani himself, Professor Letaba, and Benny, Mavis, and all the others, Figani, who's in the back end, our IT. So we thank everybody, the communications team, Rifilwe, Matikane, and all the others whom we can't mention, but there was a big team that was put together to make this possible. But most importantly, we thank all the speakers, the panelists, our facilitator, Professor Glenda Kroos, who flew from Cape Town just to be here with us. And we thank all of those who joined us virtually and in person, and all the speakers. So thank you very much. I'd like to take something that Professor Erica mentioned in her talk. She mentioned Prof as an intellectual spine. So let's leave and close the seminar to say, let's continue to use Prof's work as part of the work we do since he created the foundation, and it was excellently explained, and it was defined as the intellectual spine, and it will continue to be the intellectual spine in everything we do. We also heard about him using South Africa as a case for theory building, and we continue to contribute to that. I thank you all, and I'd like to close the seminar. Thank you very much, and thanks to the family. Thank you. We invite you all for lunch outside, and thank you to the family. Thank you very much. Thank you.